is if you look at per capita spend on healthcare, the US is by far and away the highest.
Die Geldmeisterin. Der Finanzpodcast mit Julia Kistner.
Und mit Tom Bradley-Flannagean, Investmentspezialist im Healthcare-Team von JP Morgan Asset Management. Tom fasst für die Geldmeisterin die wichtigsten Trends im boomenden Gesundheitssektor zusammen, die auch auf der 41. jährlichen JP Morgan Healthcare-Konferenz in San Francisco in dieser Woche thematisiert wurden. Did you follow some sessions?
Yes, it's great as sitting here within JP Morgan Asset Management to be affiliated to what is possibly the largest healthcare industry conference in the market. A lot of big industry players. And I think it's really useful for our management team, our research analyst team, just to be plugged into those kind of cutting edge.
And what did you see are the huge mega trends in healthcare right now?
Let me answer this two ways probably, right? So there'd be kind of demographics, right? It's the rise of the middle class and penetrating emerging markets. Everything we do is underpinned by innovation. That's the heart of what we look for in companies. And if you think about the healthcare sector, you've really got kind of innovation and those structural changes that I talked about kind of will drive the sector, we think, for decades to come. And of course, this one is more kind of, I'd say, M&A has long been a tailwind for the sector now, and we all know it slowed down somewhat over the past couple of years.
Yeah.
I think the capital market's appetite for risk in M&As has been diminished. One thing we've seen consistently, and I think has kind of underpinned the sector, is even in those kind of, I'd say, less prolific periods for M&A, you've seen the appetite for companies, and we've heard actually this week in the conference from Novo Nordisk and Sanofi, say very much in the market for what we call bolt-on acquisitions, these 4 or 5 billion. They may not be transformational, but they're very important strategic acquisitions for their business. So I think we'll continue to see that. There seems to be some appetite there for continued bolt-on acquisitions. Companies are also saying that if opportunistic kind of acquisitions or strategic moves are there, the balance sheets are strong enough for those to be taken advantage of. So I think you'll see a kind of uptick in some of this activity as we move through this year. Just saw the US CPI print, which came bang in line. So, I think as the market kind of slowly dips its toe back into the water with risk, I think you'll see kind of M&A come back to the fore. And in terms of what's being discussed at the conference, I believe there's a lot of talk about oncology. And I can see we may talk about this later on, but a lot of talk about oncology and a lot of talk about obesity. Really, Novo and Eli have been at the forefront of that, and they've been two companies we've owned for a period of time.
And why do you think we didn't see any M&As in the last time? Everybody's waiting for them in the healthcare sector.
Yeah, well, if you think about the dynamics of the healthcare sector, typically, now of course there are exceptions to this rule, but typically a large amount of the M&A activity we see are big pharma or large biotech taking out small early stage companies, right, and adding them to their roster. But those small early stage companies can be quite risky. They can be very early stage companies not generating lots and lots of revenues. This can be a long-term acquisition for companies. And if you think about just the state of the market, not just healthcare, the state of the market last year, 2022, I think just we saw an environment where capital markets appetite for risk was diminished, whether that be M&A, whether that be providing funding for early stage companies. So we saw funding kind of drop a bit for early stage biotech companies, for example. And I think it's just in keeping and indicative of that broader market environment we saw last year. And I think we understand the reasons why, right? We started off the year kind of rates going up. Then came the invasion in Eastern Europe. Then came kind of runaway inflation, energy crisis. And I think this really just detracted from the general capital markets appetite for risk. And I think what we saw in M&A markets is indicative of that.
But this will change this year or the next years, few years?
Yeah, I'd say we'd expect it to pick up, right? Companies seem to be, balance sheets are strong, particularly in the healthcare sector, particularly in, I'd say, large cap, pharma, biotech. We're hearing tools are looking like much more positive coming through the year, and some of those medtech names. We know there's appetite for bolt-on acquisitions. I think you'll see a continuation of M&A activity. There's maybe some smaller companies, but smaller companies who do have revenue generation, do have kind of a commercial presence and are generating revenues. And then I think, as I said, as that kind of risk appetite comes back in capital markets, I would expect to see an uptick in M&A as we move throughout the year.
And how would you, in generally, define healthcare? What is included in? If I look at your fund, it's really a wide field then.
It's a very interesting question, because I think our fund has a very wide universe. I was on a stage in Thailand, in Bangkok, talking healthcare a couple of months ago now. And actually, a lot of the questions, and I thought it was really interesting to get this insight, is a lot of the questions from the audience kind of see healthcare and then think about the kind of wellness and a lot of the kind of consumer-facing healthcare stuff. And that's not necessarily what we focus on. So I would say, yes, we do have a broad approach to what we consider the healthcare sector. And I'll tell you why that is. That's because we're very fortunate within JP Morgan Asset Management to have a fantastically well-resourced team of healthcare analysts. We've got 10 globally, boots on the ground in New York, London, Tokyo. We have emerging markets coverage. So for us, we can have that broad brush exposure. Now, we think about the world in 4 subsectors, as you'd have seen, Julia. So we think about pharma, biotech, so pharma, drugs and treatments and chemicals, biotech, drugs and treatments from living organisms. Then we think about kind of medtech and tools, and this can encompass kind of robotics and the hardware used in operations, as well as kind of wearable devices, I would say, feature there as well. And the 4th subsector we think about is healthcare services. So that can be the administrators of kind of healthcare, so those who actually provide it, and the payers, so the insurance companies as well. So that for us gives us a really attractive opportunity set, 4 subsectors that each provide you with a very different exposure to exciting underlying themes, underlying therapeutic areas, and so forth. So as I said, I think that's very broad. I think that's important to be diversified in a sector, particularly where there are pockets that can be quite volatile. But you can even take it one step further when you kind of think about all the consumer-facing. But for me, that's a little bit more of a kind of consumer, the wellness and so forth. I would put that more in the kind of consumer category rather than the pure healthcare, and that's certainly how we see it.
That gives you the possibility of diversification.
Exactly, yeah. So we own about 80 stocks, so and we have high conviction on those 80 stocks. We know the companies well, so because of that resource across the globe and that experience, we can have conviction across a large number of names across what we think is a really diverse and exciting sector. And
your global healthcare fund, how does your selection of healthcare titles take place?
Yeah, so we do have a benchmark. Our JP Morgan Fund's Global Healthcare Fund is benchmarked to the MSCI World Healthcare Index.
Okay.
We would say the fund is unconstrained, which is maybe what you were getting at. So we'd say the fund is unconstrained. However, we are benchmarked to that index. So, for example, we have a number of off-benchmark holdings. We hold about 15% of the portfolio are off-benchmark holdings. I think the one thing you have to be wary of an active manager in healthcare is that the benchmark is quite concentrated and quite top-heavy. There are a number of names in the benchmark at the top of the index that will have more than, say, around 6.5% index weight. So if we have a negative view on those names, yes, we'll be underweight, but will we own a zero weight? Will we be 650 basis points underweight? No, because we think that's too much risk in one single position. So we can own some of those stocks, but retain an underweight position. So that's how we really think about the benchmark.
Which healthcare sectors are the biggest right now? Is it cancer or oncology? Where are the most spending?
I mean, if I just look at the benchmark, so about 40% is pharmaceuticals. I think that probably would have been larger in decades gone by. So I think you've got a burgeoning kind of biotech market. You've got a burgeoning small cap medtech area of the market. You've got, a really exciting healthcare services environment, partly as a result of COVID, actually, where all of a sudden people can't or don't want to go to the hospital or see their physician. So you're thinking about other ways and other sites of administering care. So you've got a lot of innovation in services as well. The industry is investing in a lot of kind of next-gen therapeutics, whether that be kind of cell therapy, for example. Now, that's really kind of in the grand scheme of things, very exciting area to invest in. Still very early stage. There will be winners there. It's not clear where the winners will be. So, as an active manager like ourselves, we take fairly kind of small and managed active bets in those companies we think are well positioned to take that on to the next trial, to the next step. Sorry. You mentioned as well oncology. There's a lot going on in oncology, particularly in these kind of very directed kind of antibody targeted treatments for cancer, which I think we all agree cancer is an awful disease. So any additional progress on that front would be absolutely wonderful. And I think this is a big year as well for another horrible disease in Alzheimer's. We saw some positive clinical trials from Biogen at the back end of last year. I think Eli Lilly are expecting some clinical data later on this year. Roche had some as well back end of last year. So there's a lot going on in Alzheimer's. So I would say, if you're really pushing me, I'd say Alzheimer's, oncology, and some of that next-gen kind of cell therapy are really exciting areas to keep an eye on for this year.
So we talk a lot about the catalysts of the sector. What are the risks, like debt of social securities, which don't have money to cut the prices, or expiring patents, failure of medical stages, no permission, damages of side effects? Where do you see the big risks of this healthcare sector?
Yeah, in terms of risk, expiring patents are always something you kind of battle with in the healthcare sector. That's nothing new, and that's kind of a well-established kind of, that's the nature of doing business, right, in the large cap pharma and biotech spaces. If you'd asked me in years gone by, I would have said kind of politics is a risk. Actually, as we sit here today, we're fairly relaxed about the risk coming from politics, particularly in the US. We see a split in Congress, and you'll have seen all the kind of publicity, and there's going to be very little coming down the pipe in terms of healthcare reform. There are far bigger issues for the US to address, even if they could get any additional healthcare reform passed, which I don't think they can. So look, I would say the biggest risk is if we are entering a real prolonged and severe bear market. And it comes back to what I said before in terms of capital markets appetite for risk. I think if you enter a bear market, you have a prolonged bear market. I think you'll see a negative impact on innovation within the sector. You're likely going to be in a prolonged recession, which is bad for the person on the street who ultimately has to pay for their healthcare insurance and so forth. So that would be I think that's the biggest risk. I don't think that's going to happen.
From the point of view of the investor, is it better to take a flagship than these small vaccine companies or other specialists?
Yeah, the one thing I would caution is saying you're absolutely right to look at the top 10 holdings of the fund and the overweight positions that I believe we publish on the website. That doesn't necessarily mean there are top 10 highest 10 conviction funds. And let me tell you why. So United Health will be right at the top of that list, right? So they are, I think, about 6.5% of the index. We probably own about 9%, give or take. So we have about 250 basis point overweight position, rough numbers. If we had a 250 basis point overweight position in a small cap, so obviously United Health are a mega cap kind of managed care US insurance company, very stable, real bellwether of the US economy and the US stock market. If we had that same active position of about 250 basis points in an early stage small cap biotech company, that would entail a whole lot more risk than our position in United Health. So that's how we think about sizing. So that's one way we think about risk in the portfolio. As active managers, we have to be aware, have to be conscious of the risk investing in those smaller companies.
I also looked at your performance from year to date.
Yeah, last year, 2022, was a difficult year. It was a strange year, actually. It started off with kind of value off to the races, and any kind of growth footprint was way out of favour, and that really persisted till mid-May, June. And then all of a sudden, the market decided it was quite comfortable with some of these kind of growthy areas of the market. So that had a run through the summer and kind of plateaued. Then we had the November US CPI prints and growth was off to the races again. So a real kind of back and forth year, a number of different performance regimes. So that was a challenge for us, and kind of dealing with that as long-term fundamental investors. When you have all these external factors, other than company fundamentals, other than company pipelines, other than company intellectual property, other than management strategy, driving share price returns, that can be difficult. We have a very long-term approach in our research and our approach to fundamental research and our approach to portfolio management. So hopefully we're back to putting up positive numbers on the board this year in 2023. But yeah, look, as I said, it's been a pretty choppy environment. As I said, it's been a really prolonged downturn for biotech markets in particular. And that's been a drag for us. We found a lot of exciting opportunities in biotech.
I wish you good luck. So could we go briefly?
Thank you.
Could we go briefly through the positions of your fund? Just that you give us an idea why your team chooses the one or the other. United Health with 9.2%, it's quite heavily weighted. Why?
Yeah, this is the one we spoke. This is the example I pulled out before, right? So it's a huge index weight. So it's about, I don't have the number, I think it's about 6.5%, give or take. So that's what, you said 9.2, did you? We think United Health as a bellwether of the US healthcare sector is a very important name in the managed care. So managed care is like the insurers, the healthcare payers. I think it's a very important name in that part of the healthcare sector. We think they've got a very important role to play in terms of ensuring that the American public have all the access to healthcare that they need. And look, United Health is a really steady company, right? So yes, of course, we've seen over the last couple of years there can be volatility in just about any name. But for us, we have a high conviction in the stock.
United Health also als grundsolides Krankenversicherungsunternehmen, das das US-amerikanische Gesundheitssystem effizienter macht. Der Konzern ist auch sehr breit aufgestellt mit Gesundheitsprodukten und in der Gesundheitsvorsorge. Der Biotech-Pharma-Wert AbbVie.
AbbVie have had a blockbuster drug for years and years, Humira. Now, we and the market were concerned that AbbVie, and you mentioned patents before, right? We were worried that Humira revenues would drop off a cliff as soon as biosimilars and the threat of biosimilars would emerge. They've done a good job at maintaining Humira revenues, using the revenues they've generated from that drug, which is used for rheumatoid arthritis, and reinvigorating that pipeline. That's what we want from these kind of large cap, mega cap biotech companies, as well as pharmaceuticals companies. But what do you do with the revenues that you receive? Are you reinvesting them in R&D and innovation? And we think AbbVie have done a good job of that.
AbbVie ist auf Therapien von einigen der schwersten und komplexesten Erkrankungen spezialisiert. Bei Augenerkrankungen sind sie mit Tropfen führend. And Eli Lilly, is it because of the new medicine? I think it's against obesity.
It's a good question. The beauty of Eli Lilly is they're so diversified. Yeah. They've got so many different, but Eli Lilly have oncology, Alzheimer's, and many other areas that they are involved in. So that, as an investor, that gives us great confidence in the diversification of their revenue streams.
Eli Lilly hat nicht nur einen schönen Namen, sondern überzeugt natürlich auch mit seinem vielversprechenden neuen Medikament gegen Fettleibigkeit. Das Portfolio des Unternehmens ist generell sehr jung und auch sehr breit. Sie haben etwa ein Alzheimer-Medikament, auf das Tom Bradley-Flannagean große Stücke setzt. Sehr stark ist Eli Lilly auch im Bereich Diabetes, in der Onkologie und Immunologie. Der Umsatz liegt bei 28,3 Milliarden US-Dollar. And what about Thermo Fisher Scientific?
Thermo Fisher Scientific, so medtech tools company. Again, it's all of these names will be skewed to the large cap. Very high quality. I think that is, if you think about the dynamics we've seen in the healthcare industry, really over, where are we? Really for the best part of the last 3 years. It's that people are interacting less with the healthcare industry in terms of going to the hospital, going to the doctors, right? So that's a concept we call utilization, healthcare utilization. So healthcare utilization has been really low. Thermo Fisher, as a kind of tools provider, they're exposed to utilization picking back up, right? More procedures, you need more hardware, you need more equipment to carry out operations. And Thermo Fisher, we positively exposed to that trend. So that's really a play on this. Think of it as like the healthcare reopening, if you like, is kind of operations and procedures returning to normalized levels within the healthcare sector.
Für das Medizintechnikunternehmen Thermo Fisher Scientific spricht also die Qualität ihrer Präzisionsgeräte für alle möglichen medizinischen Anwendungen. Thermo Fisher setzt knapp 40 Milliarden US-Dollar um. And AstraZeneca?
Again, kind of mega cap, real kind of bellwether of the UK stock market. Good management. They've recently announced a small acquisition, actually, an acquisition that was discussed at a conference. I forget who it was. I read it this morning. But look, diversified business, diversified treatment areas.
Für AstraZeneca spricht also die Größe als einer der weltweit führenden Arzneimittelherstellern mit jede Menge neue Pillen in den Bereichen Onkologie und Stoffwechselkrankheiten in der Pipeline. And Novo Nordisk?
Well, Novo Nordisk have long been industry leaders in diabetes. Not only that, one thing we've always liked about Novo Nordisk is that they sell their insulin to basically poorer countries, lesser economically developed countries at cheaper prices. Because that's actually where it's needed the most. So they've always done that, had that huge kind of tick in the box on the social side. And what they've done a great job at doing is they have, and you touched upon it before with Eli Lilly, they've really burst open the obesity market over the past 12 to 18 months with this blockbuster drug Wegovy. And that's been a huge, huge success. They're a fantastic company.
Yes. Ja, die Dänen Novo Nordisk sind einer der wenigen europäischen Pharmaschwergewichte im JP Morgan Global Healthcare Fund. Breit aufgestellt haben sie unter anderem ein vielversprechendes Medikament auch gegen Fettleibigkeit sowie Eli Lilly entwickelt und sind führend im Sektor Diabetes. And what about Regeneron Pharmaceuticals?
Yeah, Regeneron had some really positive news flow. I think in September. Don't hold me to that. Could be a month either side. Their kind of flagship and blockbuster drug has been something called Eylea, EYLEA, and that treats eye cancer essentially, molecular kind of condition in the eye. And that was, again, similar to what I mentioned about Humira and AbbVie. That was approaching the end of its period of exclusivity, if you like. What Regeneron, have been able to do is they've been able to develop that treatment Eylea and make and really kind of form a stronger dose so that it has to be used less frequently, it has to be applied, and the patient has to kind of administer it less frequently. So that's given a huge new kind of runway for revenues for this Eylea. I think Eylea 2 is the kind of short-term reference to that. I forget the scientific name. That gives us greater confidence, I would say, in the longer-term kind of durability of those revenues for sure.
Regeneron Pharmaceuticals ist mir bis jetzt eigentlich entgangen, obwohl es einer der innovativsten und produktivsten Biotech-Unternehmen mit einem erwarteten jährlichen Gewinnwachstum von 15% zwischen 2021 bis 2027 ist. Ihr Tochterunternehmen hier ist sehr stark in der Behandlung altersbedingter Augenkrankheiten. Regeneron ist auch bei Allergien und im Krebsforschungsbereich innovativ. And last but not least, Roche.
Yeah, Roche, obviously kind of big name in Switzerland. They have really kind of diverse kind of book, if you like. So they have, yes, they've been involved in COVID. And we typically, general rule of thumb, we didn't get involved in companies like the Modernas, the Gileads, purely due to a kind of one-off kind of COVID benefit, if you like, on revenues. Roche had some exposure to COVID diagnostics, but also has really well diversified exposure to lots of other areas. Historically, done a good job at executing. Innovative company, have been building out their exposure in some of those exciting areas I touched upon earlier, such as like the gene and the cell therapy. So Roche they're a company we've got confidence in terms of their innovating and reinvesting kind of the revenues they get into an exciting pipeline for us.
Der Schweizer Pharma-Riese Roche, den mag man eben mit einer Familie als starken Kernaktionär. Der Konzern ist sehr breit aufgestellt, stark in der Krebsbehandlung. In den USA hat Roche gerade die Zulassung für sein Lymphom-Krebsmedikament Lunsumio erhalten. And except of Roche and Novo Nordisk, you only have US companies in the top list. Your fund is just weighted 16% in European titles. Why are the US companies so heavily weighted? Is there no good pharma companies in the Asia or Chinese area? Why?
Yeah, there are. There's a growing market in Asia and China specifically. The short answer to your question is the US is by far and away the most innovative market when it comes to healthcare and when it comes to scientific innovation. One other reason is if you look at per capita spend on healthcare, the US is by far and away the highest. There's a huge. I think the US spend about 18% of GDP on healthcare. So there's just a huge opportunity set there. Now, there are some growing, there are some fantastic companies in Europe. So like Lonza is another one, exposed to a Swiss name, exposed to kind of bioprocessing and manufacturing. And we hired a new analyst at the start of 2022, Amy Walker, to formally cover the European industrial health and medtech sector. We appreciate that as a kind of growing part of the market. So it's something we may see greater exposure there moving forward. And as I said, China, growing footprint and presence. It'll be interesting to see which way the China healthcare market goes. If they continue to spend up on innovation, they could be a real force in a number of years. Our team of healthcare analysts managed to do a site visit to a lot of the great Chinese facilities and laboratories in the back end of 2019, pre-pandemic. But as we all know, investing with China brings with it some risks. It brings with it some volatility. It brings with it possible government interference. And these are all the things you need to kind of weigh up before you invest and as and when you invest.
And to make a long story short, personally, in which sectors or treatments do you see the most opportunities?
Long term, on a kind of decade plus view, I think gene and cell therapy will be transformational to the way we treat a number of things, not least cancers, but also in kind of in a proactive, preventative manner. You're seeing companies, next step will be saying, okay, how do we kind of fix that defective gene? How do we repair that? How do we make this, not a kind of life-changing symptom for patients. So I think that's going to be a slow burn, and I think there's a lot going on in the oncology space as well.
Thank you, Tom, for your patience, for your experience and time. I say hello to London and thank you very much.
Thanks, Julia. Bye-bye.
Über aktuelle Börsenaufreger und Ereignisse berichtet Werktag für Werktag übrigens die kleine Podcast-Schwester der Geldmeisterin, die Börsenminute. Überall, wo es Podcasts gibt, auf YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Xing und auch auf www.geldmeisterin.com. Eine erfolgreiche Anlagewoche wünscht euch die Geldmeisterin und Julia Kistner. Und am Schluss noch der Disclaimer. An dieser Stelle wie immer der wichtige Hinweis, dass die Inhalte dieses Podcasts, der Videos und der Webseite geldmeisterin.com ausschließlich der allgemeinen Information dienen und die ganz persönliche Meinung der Geldmeisterin und von Julia sind. Es handelt sich keinesfalls um Investmentempfehlungen, Rechts- oder Anlageberatungen. Das Gesagte, Geschriebene und Dargestellte kann und soll auch nicht das persönliche Gespräch mit deiner Finanzberaterin ersetzen. Auch sind weder die Geldmeisterin noch Julia Kistner informiert darüber, wie es mit deiner Vermögenssituation ausschaut, deinen Bedürfnissen, familiären Umständen, deinem Finanzwissen, die Risikoneigung oder deinen Anlagehorizont. Anlegen erfolgt daher auf eigene Gefahr. Die Geldmeisterin und Julia Kistner haften nicht für Anlageentscheidungen, die aufgrund ihrer Medienbeiträge getroffen werden. Kurzum, für die Geldmeisterin und Julia Kistner war es immer ein Vergnügen, dich bei deinem Vermögensaufbau zu inspirieren. Auf deinen eigenen, persönlich richtigen Geldesel musst du schon selbst setzen. Viel Erfolg!